Hi, my name is Andre Williams. Welcome to my presentation. I am a Master of Science in Organizational Leadership, major at Brenau University. This course, OL703, is Critical and Creative Thinking. Our professor is Dr. Bill Haney, and we're happy that you could join us tonight. This project is based upon something that we reviewed as a class November 13, 2021 at the High Museum of Art here in Atlanta, Georgia. What was on display that day were artists who were not professionals, who were not trained in their art. And they were called the gate crashers. So this presentation pays homage to those gate crashers as a way of representing the 6 creators in Barron's Creators on Creating textbook. In addition to the gate crashers themselves, specifically I want to pay homage to one in particular, and that's a woman by the name of Nellie Mae Rowe, who started her artwork late in her life and made her home into her art, both inside and outside. So that's what I've attempted to do here today. And I'm going to just go through it with you and share a little bit about these creators, some of the similarities and differences that we have, and how they have inspired me to be the creator that I believe I'm destined to be. So come on in and join me. First of all, you notice that our gate has in fact been crashed down. So that has to go. There are no barriers, if you will, to creators other than those barriers that we create for ourselves. The first creator that I've chosen is a gentleman by the name of Henry Miller. And as soon as I began to read Henry Miller's writing, I recognized my own voice. I recognized him in some particular ways. For instance, he wanted to make sure that his writing did not distinguish him as something strange. He did not want to be the artist in the sense that the artist would separate him from the common man. In fact, he wanted his writing to bring about some sort of universal consciousness that brings everyone together, without which the writer, the artist, is isolated, something that he never wanted to be. But more importantly, what drew me to Henry Miller was what he had to say about the process of writing. How the best part of writing for him was the brickwork, laying brick upon brick. It was the spade work, as he called it. As someone who has started and not completed over 25 works, I could relate to that. But what it helped me understand is that the part of the process that I have completed, the outlines that I have provided to the titles, the inspiration, the thoughts that have come to me over the years, are a good starting point. So it's appropriate, I think, that Henry Miller represents the first step. The brick upon brick, the spade work. Secondly, there's Annie Dillard. Annie Dillard grew up outside of Pittsburgh, but she and her sisters, her 2 younger sisters, spent summers with their grandmother, in Lake Erie, in that area of the country. I grew up in the Midwest, in Michigan, and I kind of got a sense from doing the research on Annie Miller that I knew her, that I recognized her. One of the things I recognized about Annie Miller almost immediately was her irreverence. She grew up Presbyterian, but talked about how at Presbyterian camps they would sing Baptist hymns. She grew up playing boogie woogie on the piano. She was a fiery person. By the time she was 15, 16 years old, her teachers pretty much, what they knew of her, didn't care much for her. She was the type of girl growing up who 2 days in a row broke her nose sledding downhill on her stomach head first. That was Annie Miller. But there's something also irreverent about Annie Miller. She puts you in the mind of a C.S. Lewis in the Screwtape Letters. And by the way, he was one of her mentors. She enjoyed reading his writing growing up. But she puts you in mind of a C.S. Lewis in the way that she questions everything. She questions the creator, she questions creation, and what is its purpose, what is its meaning. And in particular, in the book, in Creators on Creating, there's an excerpt that's titled Heaven and Earth in Jest, in which Annie does exactly that. She asks the question, what is it all for? But there's a particular quote in there as this whole scene, this whole scenario that she's describing that starts with a walk along the beach begins to come to fruition. in which she recognizes something that has to do not just with the scene, not just with the walk along the ocean and the fate of this lone frog that she sees that's fallen prey to this parasite that deflates as though the air is being drawn out of it. But in questioning why a creator would create something like this, it all begins to come together for her when she says that creation is all about fire, that the whole world was set on fire from the beginning. And while she's come down to the water to cool her eyes, everywhere she looks, everything is fire, and what is not flint is tinder. And so I represented Annie with fire. Why? What is it I've taken away from Annie? I've taken away from Annie not just the willingness to question everything and that capacity to be irreverent, but the ability to embrace her entire vocabulary. And I challenge you to go back and read that piece when you have a chance in Barron's Creators on Creating on Annie Dillard, and find that particular passage. You'll see why I represent her with fire. Thirdly, it's Italo Calvino. Italo Calvino was born in Cuba, but moved to Italy when he was a teenager. And he became part of the resistance movement during the war and even joined the Communist Party. Everything that you read about Calvino seems very stark. In fact, he describes himself as a minimalist. He says that his approach to writing is that he attempts to subtract weight from everything, subtract weight from his subjects, whether those are individuals or cities or whatever they may be. But the odd thing about Calvino is that he wrestles with imagination. In fact, he suggests that imagination can come either from something that is tangible, something you see, or it can create tangible things as though it has come from nowhere, whether it's come from inspiration or from epiphany. But he suspects that however you term it, that it does come from somewhere else. It's something that we receive. And he even speculates, does Calvino, that in this age, this modern world of ours, where so much is reduced to images and stock images at that, and snap photos and the like, whether or not we might be losing our ability to imagine. To imagine. And so I wanted to just represent Italo Calvino with a simple slate, minimalist, if you will, with just the word imagine. He reminds me to continue to do that, even as the world around me changes. As someone I know reminded me not too long ago, the older we get, the more we have to be careful not to lose our ability to do that. Don't forget to imagine. The fourth step, one of my favorites, the Queen, Maya Angelou. What can I say about Maya Angelou? In the book Creators on Creating, Maya deals with, for about 3 pages, it's something that's called A Life in the Day of Maya Angelou. And no, that's not a slip of the tongue. A Life in the Day of Maya Angelou. And in those 3 pages, she goes on, it's based upon an interview that she did with Carol Sarler. And she goes on and on for about 1.5 pages or 2 pages of the things that she just does in a given day. From greeting her maid at 8 o'clock in the morning, and then the housekeeper coming and opening mail and sitting down with a glass of Dewar's, white label, fixing lunch for her friends, and the artwork in her home, and how she suspects that African-American art, and by the way, her home was filled with it, must be based upon music because all of the pieces speak to her and, in fact, give her their music, to the point that sometimes if she hasn't stopped to pay attention to 1 or 2 of them, after a while they will stop her and they'll say, "Have you listened to me lately?" Maya does all of that, and then she stops and she says, "But when it comes to writing, you can throw all of that aside." And then she spends just 1 paragraph in that entire 3 pages talking about her writing process. And in her process, she goes away to a hotel room. And she insists that they take down everything off the walls, that all that is in the room is just Maya and her Bible and some dry sherry and a Roget's Thesaurus. And she leans on her elbow and writes longhand on a yellow legal pad. One elbow, she says, is darker than the other for this. But she only spends 4 hours writing from 6:30 a.m. until 12:30. After that, Maya says that anything else is an extravagance, and she's going to end up editing it anyhow. Or I should say, it turns into an indulgence after that, after 4 hours in a hotel room. And then she's going to end up editing anything that she's written. But my takeaway from her, and my takeaway from this piece, is to embrace your whole life, embrace your whole person, and take all of that into the room with you when you write. Yes, you have to have time to create. You have to set aside time, but it shouldn't be something that's a doldrum. It shouldn't be something that's regimented. It should be something where you bring your whole person to the endeavor. And as a matter of fact, she didn't just bring herself, because in those times that she's spending through her day at her home, one of the things that she does is she sits down and she picks up the newspaper and she reads not the front page stories, but she reads the letters to the editor. 9 out of 10 of which are complaints and things aren't going right and the whole world is wrong. And she says in that time, she meets 9 or 10 people whom she had not known. You can bet that if you knew anything at all about Maya and her work, that she would take those people into the room with her, and that was also part of her writing. But again, the main takeaway is, if you're going to create, then you have to relax. Igor Stravinsky. Wow, what can you say about Stravinsky? Born in St. Petersburg, Russia, Stravinsky, by the time of his death, had over 100 works that were associated with his name. He was a composer and a conductor and a classical musician, a writer of classical music, and director as well. And he had this tremendous intellect, did Stravinsky. But he didn't just use his intellect for composing music. When he did compose, he imagined that the things that came to him were like little notes, little tidbits, things that just were sort of dropped on him, and he would make note of them and he would put them aside until a time, as he would put it, that is more profitable, and then he would pull them out and pull them together. But it caused him to create things in music that had never been seen before, that had never been known. And for that, people referred to him as a revolutionary. But he pushed against that. Stravinsky pushed against the notion that he was a revolutionary in two ways. First of all, he said that if something revolves, then it ends up coming back around to where it began. And then secondly, he said that any creator, whether they are a painter or a sculptor or a musician, as he was, if they do anything to move their art, if they add anything new to their art, then they're moving it forward. They're not bringing it back at all. And so he pushed back against those who would try to define him, rather than allowing his music to define itself. And when you think about it, how can anything new that comes from a little bit here and a little bit there and a little bit from somewhere else be defined by someone other than the artist anyhow? We just let it do what it does. And those of us who enjoy it, not those of us who criticize it, not those of us who critique it, but those of us who enjoy it, it becomes what it is to each one of us. And so I have this little plaque here that I was able to find that says, "Your opinion is not part of the recipe." That's my Stravinsky, but not just my tribute to him, his tribute to me, to say to me as a creator, to push back against how others would attempt to define you and your work. Maybe a lesson there for all of us. And then finally, Laurence Olivier. I was trying to decide who would I choose for this sixth creator, and I read through all of the works in Creators on Creating by Barron, and this was actually the last one I read. I don't know why, because with Miller, for example, it was the first one I read. With Maya Angelou in that grouping, I think hers was the first one I read. But so Laurence Olivier, kind of thought maybe he would be the one, and so I wanted to do a process of elimination. And I just wasn't really feeling anything from the others. And then came Olivier, and as soon as I read it, I understood why. 3, 2, 1. Over 160 plays and more than 15 TV appearances and close to 60 movies. Olivier was a superstar. Some called him the greatest actor of his generation. Some say the greatest actor of the 20th century. Others have said the greatest actor that ever lived. He certainly was the envy of many and the heartthrob of many as well. But something happened. He was a classically trained actor. He started acting at the age of 8, and in his classical training often did Shakespeare. And he had done these plays, as I said, numerous times, umpteen times. But something happened late in his life. He was getting ready to perform The Merchant of Venus, Shakespeare's Merchant of Venus, and he was struck by stage fright. And by stage fright, he does not mean first night jitters. He means something much deeper than that. Something that closes up your throat. Something that keeps you from being able to sleep. Something that takes away your appetite. Something that makes you go back and rehearse the lines over and over and over again because you're afraid that you might not remember them when it's time for you to take the stage. An odd thing for someone who is so well trained and so gifted as he was, and yet late in his career and in his profession, that's exactly what he experienced. 3, 2, 1. He felt like he was locked in place. He felt like he couldn't move. He heard the play taking place on the stage. He knew it was his cue to move, but how could he do it? Somehow he made his way to the Klieg lights, and he could hear, sort of like an echo, the words that were being spoken by the other actors, and he knew that his time was coming, but he could not remember his line. There was his cue, and he felt as though he was standing there and couldn't understand why the audience is not laughing by now, because surely he's been standing there for minutes. Stage fright. 3, 2, 1. But somehow he gets through it. Somehow he delivers the line, and then the next one, and then the next one. And he makes it through. What does that mean to me? It says to me, someone who, as you can see, it's not just getting started in this. There are going to be times when you're going to feel as though you just can't do it. For writers, we think of it as writer's block. There may be times when we sit down to write, maybe times when we're called upon to perform or to present, when we just don't feel like we have it. 3, 2, 1, and yet it comes. It comes as a result of our training. It comes as a result of our experience. It comes because it was there all along. And sometimes we have to wait, and sometimes we have to go through some tremendous, burdensome, horrific trials in order to get what is inside us to come out. But it does. And that's what I took away from Sir Laurence Olivier. So, brick upon brick, the spade work, the fire, freedom to use my entire vocabulary, the remembrance, the reminder, the recollection to imagine, the admonition to embrace my whole self and my whole being, but then to relax and let what I'm doing be done, and to push back against the critics and to define myself and my own work, to insist upon it, and then finally to recognize that while there may be times when it's difficult, that it's doable. 3, 2, 1. And that brings me to the 7th step in my house. It is my writing room. I would call it the upper room. And here it is. My upper room, my writing room. I'm represented here with a table and an inkwell and a pen. On the left-hand side, you see a book. It's that book that's not yet written, but about to be. And then on the right-hand side, you see something that's actually the first book that yours truly is going to complete and send to be published. It's actually based upon a dream that I had some years ago when I was going through a very dark and difficult period in my life, and woke up from that dream, from that vision, and asked wherever epiphanies come from, asked the universe, what does this mean? And I took out my pencil and I began to write. And this is what came out. And the title of it is Sing the Beating of Wings. I'm going to give you just a little bit of it. You can see it here. It's Sing the Song of Beating Wings, song of angelic beings that men could never fain repeat, else into the world did bring. Join forlorn melodies of cast down souls, ring harmony in the music of old, pound out hope from anguished breasts in chorus resurgent and bold. Now, I warn you, it is copyrighted and it will be published. So no, you cannot have it. But as soon as it comes out, I'll be sure and post something on YouTube and let you know. That's my presentation as a gatecrasher. My home, my steps, my muses, to my room, to my work. Thank you so much for joining me today. I appreciate your time. I look forward to you in, as Dr. Bill would say, in the electronic hallways. I look forward to seeing your presentations as well. Thank you all, and good night.